Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second date in Aussie October. My name is Catherine Dupuy-Ménager, and I'm the Artistic Director of Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia. We recognise their continuing connection to land, to waters, and to culture, and we pay our respects to their elders, past and present. And before I start the interview, I also want to thank our sponsors, the City of Sydney and Create New South Wales. We wouldn't be able to do anything without them, either our online program or our very soon to be face-to-face program. So thank you very, very much. We have a relationship with Booktopia, and that's where we invite you to go to get Tim and Chris's books tonight. So on to our interview. I'd like to give a very warm welcome to Tim Ayliffe. When Tim isn't doing his day job as managing editor of television and video for the ABC, which kind of would be enough for many people, he writes thrillers kind of in his spare time and has a family as well. So interesting life. Your thrillers are really gripping and they're set in Australia. So we recognize our familiar landmarks and we recognize our social and political realities, which I think is really exciting, instead of looking at American ones and wondering what they're talking about. So this is not your first gig at Bad. You've been here often. And of course, you were interviewing Chris a couple of weeks ago. So this is a sort of rematch, but not a grudge rematch. It's a love rematch because you know it's going to be a really good event. Tim, so Chris, welcome back. Chris is another journo turned sensational crime writer, and Treasure and Dirt, your latest book, which we discussed last time, is a real winner. Of course, all your books are real winners, so that's good too. Finally, I'd like to welcome all the members of the Bad community, and in particular, anybody joining us from libraries right across Australia, or well, Australia we'd like, New South Wales certainly, and perhaps even Australia. It's great to have you all here. So how we'll run this event is as follows. Chris and Tim will talk for about 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, depends a bit how you're going. Chris will remind you to send questions through probably, but last time they just flowed in like an unending stream, so I can't think we're going to have a problem. Thanks to the generosity of Simon and Schuster, we're going to have two packages of Tim's books for the two best questions that have been asked. If there are too many, we won't get to all of them, but the two best questions that we have been asked, and we've got a nice team waiting here to have a little fight behind the scenes. So, and no appeals, I'm afraid. Judges' opinions are final. So I'll let you start, and we look forward to hearing about The Enemy Within.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can see me. I can see the question and answer screen. So if you want to send some questions in and I spot them out of my corner of my eye, I can then sort of put them to Tim. Tim, let's start. We'll assume that some people at least haven't read the book yet, right? So can you give us a brief kind of synopsis, a bit of an elevator pitch without spoilers?
Sure can. Good to chat again, Chris. So the Enemy Within, John Bailey, is the third in the John Bailey thriller series. And John Bailey, this time he's in Sydney. He's got a new job with an Investigative magazine after being made redundant from the newspaper where he'd worked for a very long time. He's going along to do an investigative piece about a far-right nationalist leader who's come out to Australia. This guy's name's Augustus Strong, and he's one of those sort of extremist figures that people like to follow, and he's out and about. He's doing these events, one of which is in Sydney, and Bailey goes along, and in the crowd are a bunch of sort of interesting people, from neo-Nazis to those that are, I guess, anti-establishment. The sort of far-right nationalist movement we've seen, kick along around the world. You've got that sort of ragtag bunch there, but including some pretty unsavory neo-Nazi figures. And at the same time, there's been some racist motivated violence on Sydney streets. And so Bailey finds himself investigating not just Augusta Strong, but the motivations behind these attacks. And while he's investigating that, and that's a neo-Nazi movement that's got links to the United States, he also finds himself in the crosshairs of the law, and the AFP is raiding his home, looking for the source of a story that he wrote quite a while ago. So these worlds collide as Bailey gets himself into some pretty interesting pickles in these stories and finds a way to get himself out.
So this character, Augustus Strong, and the right-wing extremists that you depict in this book, are they purely out of your imagination, or are they kind of based on some real-life people?
Well, I mean, everything in my books, I often say that everything either has happened, will happen, or could happen. I'm really interested in that real-world backdrop to the crime thrillers that I write. So we've seen this far-right nationalist movement rising across the world, and there's far-right, what you would call far-right nationalist leaders in more than half a dozen countries right now. The boss of ASIO about 18 months ago, in fact, while I was writing this book, gave this speech where he called out the threat of white supremacists and neo-Nazi groups in Australia as one of the biggest threats that we're facing. And ASIO was directing a lot of resources to combating that growing threat. And we've seen 60 Minutes done some great work. The ABC's Background Briefing and others have done some really good work in exposing these, neo-Nazis that have been hiding in the shadows, but they have sort of been given this sort of impetus to come forward as they discover each other online and I guess egg each other on. So I think the Augustus Strong figure, he's based on several people, real life people, but look, I don't want to go into too much detail so I don't get sued, but yeah, look, it's a real thing. These people are out there egging people on. They've got followers, and so Augustus Strong is certainly based on reality.
So when you decide to write on something like these white extremists and the threat that they pose, is that because you want to get some sort of message across, or is it more that you're thinking, oh, this is something that's there kind of floating around, in the ether? It's something that people will either be interested in or worried about?
I'm usually looking at something that is either a trend or a looming trend or threat that we're facing, or something that I think that can be explored with fiction in a way that it can't be explored with nonfiction. With fiction, you can actually get really close to the truth in a way that with nonfiction you can't, because you get to, with fiction, create the characters and the environments to tell that story. So with my first book, The Greater Good, that's about Australia caught in the middle of the US-China power struggle. And the idea for that book, it's probably an example about, I guess, how my brain works and where these ideas come from. With that book, I was in the United States for a few weeks, and I was there it was actually a State Department scholarship, and I was really lucky to meet some fascinating people and be clued into some interesting conversations, that most of which I can't share. But one thing I can share, from one of the conversations I'd had, the question they asked me, which was just fascinating. So I'm not divulging anything I shouldn't here, but the question was, could I ever see a day when Australia turned its back on the United States in favour of a closer relationship with China? And this was back in 2012 during the Obama re-election campaign. It was actually a couple of months out from the election itself. And that just got me thinking, what if? How would that play out? Is this something that is real? Australia depends so heavily on Chinese resources and the Chinese economy. Is this something that is a real possibility of happening? And I think over the last 8 years since I had that conversation, we've seen that the rise of China and suggestions that Australia, maybe shouldn't be politicking too much and criticising China because it could affect us economically. These are all things that are being talked about. So to answer your question, the world as it is now and where it's going. So the things that influence us and have an impact on our daily lives. So with my second book, it was Islamic terrorism. And with this book, it's far-right nationalism and how that's been, egging on, I guess, this neo-Nazis to feel emboldened to stand up and actually be heard, which is quite a worrying sign, I think.
Okay, I'm getting, I don't know if it's my internet connection or yours or the server or something. I'm getting a little bit of breakup. So Tim, forgive me if I seem to repeat a question. Maybe because I haven't fully picked up the answer. I want to ask you about your main guy, your main protagonist, John Bailey. He's 3 books in now. He's a journo, you're a journo. The inevitable question, is he based on you? Is he based on people you know, journos you know, and how realistic is he meant to be?
Look, I'm getting you great, by the way, on Signal. So if anyone else, we'll just get a message come through in the chat here. Ask anyone else using the internet to stop for a moment.
Yes. So Tim, hi. Yeah. If what could be happening is multiple people might be using the internet at the same time, which would cause your internet to not be so stable. Can you just check to see if anyone else is? I'm happy for you to step away for a moment to do that.
Yeah, is my internet unstable, is it?
Yes, it is. So we seem to be losing you for a bit.
Oh, okay, bugger. Give me a sec.
Stand by, everyone. Well, thank you, Chris.
I'll just tap dance here. No, seriously, if you haven't read Tim's books, they're fantastic. They're very much at the kind of, everyone gets sort of put together as crime writers. You walk into the bookstore and there's this big bookshelf, crime and thrillers. Some like mine and like Tim's, I guess, have an outside protagonist, but his is more at that thriller action end of the spectrum. Then there's the unreliable narrator ones and the ones with the big twists in them. Okay, Tim, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm back. Hopefully, is that better from me or not?
Yeah, look, it seems to be. It was really good. It was just every now and then it would break up.
Okay, sorry about that. I've got off everything else in the house.
Okay. Here's a question for you from Kim Pennings. She asks, do you hide any secrets in your books, I guess like Easter eggs or something, that only a few people would understand? Like, and her example is like a reference to a song. Only a former lover would know.
No. The answer to that is no subliminal messages. No, it's just about the story.
Okay, so in a more maybe serious follow-up to that, when you're writing, are you always thinking of the reader, how they're going to respond to what you write? Do you have like a typical reader in mind, or is it more like you're just writing for yourself?
I think I'm always thinking about the reader, to be honest with you. I'm just shutting something down here that might make this better. All right. Yeah, so I'm always thinking about the reader. I feel like, as a thriller writer, that you owe it to the reader to write a pacey story that's going to keep them wanting to turn page after page and glued to the page. So I don't necessarily write for myself, but look, I do write to my strengths though, in that. So that means a lot of things that really interest me, because I feel like I understand those things. I understand Sydney, for instance, as a setting, as a character for my books. So I do constantly think about the reader. I make sure that there are enough, I guess, drum beats happening through the book to keep it ticking over, and that I'm exploring characters in a way where people are going to feel close to them, whether that's not just John Bailey, whether that's some of the other key characters in the story that I want people to identify with, and particularly, some of the women that I try to write. I get, as I'm probably sure you do, Chris, you get advice about when you're writing from a woman's perspective, as I know you've done with Mandalay Blonde, that you might have some feedback that, I'm not sure that a woman would say it like that, or maybe she wouldn't dress like that. So those things that level of authenticity is really important for me. So I am thinking about the reader constantly when I'm writing.
So Kim Pennings asks a related question there. What's the most difficult thing about writing characters from the opposite sex?
That's a tough one. I think I don't necessarily. I mean, I'm definitely trying to get inside the skin of all the characters that I write. With, I guess, writing someone from the opposite sex, I have a lot of female friends. I've known a lot of women over the years, and to think hopefully that, I've tried to understand them as best as I can. Look, I think it's not being afraid to, take some of that feedback from some of my readers. I've got readers that help me with drafts and to give me that feedback. So yeah, it's just being really open-minded about maybe trying to improve something so it's more authentic. So yeah, I've always got an open mind for that stuff. So I guess that's a difficult one to answer, but I feel that I feel I'm quite an empathetic person, so that I've been a good listener over time for people, and I've had a lot of really close friends, both male and female, that hopefully has helped me along the way.
Well, we've discussed John Bailey. Tell us about the female characters in this book, without giving away kind of plot points or anything. Can you give us a sort of a pen portrait of the characters here?
Yeah, so look, Bailey is dealing with a trauma of loss, and he's learning in many ways to, I guess, trust and trust himself to be able to love again as well. So there's a woman called Annie Brooks, and she was in my previous book, State of Fear, as well. She and Bailey had an affair, not an affair, had a relationship in Lebanon, Beirut, when they were both there working as correspondents. But when they were both quite reckless kind of living characters, a lot of correspondents, can be, maybe not so much these days, but certainly in the past, heavy drinking, workaholics, you're on this constant treadmill of reporting. And so Annie Brooks and Bailey, they're actually both battling, battling alcoholism. And they and Annie is back in Sydney. She had been sort of the victim of domestic violence in her marriage breakdown, and she's dealing with, I guess, her problems there. And she and Bailey bump into each other at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in the previous book. So in this book, they've got this friendship where they're helping each other and supporting each other because they really know what each other's going through. And that does develop into a bit of a relationship whereby Bailey's feeling like, am I ready again? Or is, we more than just friends here? But he's certainly learning to confide in someone else again, and trust. And then there's his daughter as well, Miranda Bailey, who he was a bit of a distant father for her throughout all of her childhood, when he was, chasing that adrenaline of being a war reporter for decades in the Middle East. And he's rekindled that friendship the relationship with his daughter, and they're very close now. And she's really, looking out for him, and he's trying to be a good father to her. And the other woman in his life is he's got a dog called Campo, which is a rescue greyhound, which in some ways is a bit of a metaphor for Bailey, someone who needed a home, and this dog's called Campo, and it's a female dog, but Bailey's a rugby union fan who thinks back and harks back to the years of the Great Wallabies, so he couldn't resist but call it Campo.
Okay, fair enough. So there are thrillers, some of which are highly, highly successful, selling the millions, and they're kind of all action. But what you're describing here, particularly with Bailey, his alcoholism, his sort of reliance on some people to some extent, there's a emotional aspect, I guess, an emotional depth to him and other characters in the book. Is that deliberate, or is that just what you feel is important? Is that how important is that to you in a whole makeup of the book?
It's really important. I think that I want to be able to show characters that are very authentic, and that means warts and all. And I think Bailey's obsessed with the truth and obsessed with his job. Like, he's an investigative journalist. He is not happy unless he is moving on a story and chasing something down. And that level of obsession, that leads to quite a dysfunctional life. And so for him, be able to tell his backstory, as I tend to touch on in all the books, and the things that made him the way he is, and the way that he connects with other people, and then sharing their backstories too. It's really important for me. I mean, I love character. And to be honest with you, I think that the best crime novels and thriller books that I've ever read, character is where you really pull in the reader. I mean, if you can really enjoy spending time with the people you're reading about, whether you love or hate them, but you really want to spend time with them, that's succeeding for me with good writing. I think, characters is super important.
One of the outstanding characters in your book, sort of a larger than life guy, is Ronnie Johnson, who's the CIA, he's the CIA station chief in Sydney now, he's this huge American sort of cigar chomping guy. Tell us about him.
Well, Ronnie and Bailey first encountered each other back in Beirut at the aftermath of a bomb attack, on a car bomb attack, and that's where they first met in the late 80s. And they'd had this sort of unlikely friendship ever since. They were both crossed paths in the Middle East, with Ronnie doing his job, which is, for the greater good, his idea of the greater good, serving American interests, and Bailey sometimes getting in his way to chase down the truth. But they've had this unlikely friendship, and Ronnie was supposedly retired back in Sydney in my first book, The Greater Good, and Sydney is his new home. Australia is his new home, and he'd been working as on and off, or is a bit mysterious about how much he's actually been working, because he's a bit older than Bailey. But he seems to be called in for the big moments when it involves, US interests. So yeah, Ronnie's this supposedly retired. He's a big man, and he doesn't mind getting his hands dirty for his idea of the greater good.
There's a couple of questions here that sort of cover the issue of research. How much research you do for your stories, including on things, say in this book on white extremism and the patterns in Australia. How important is that to you? And a kind of an associated question, one from Kim Pennings, is do you deliberately set your books in a particular time, as in it's set the year you're writing, or how does your thinking on that work?
Pretty close to the year I'm writing, to be honest. To answer that question, I don't think that'll always be the case. But the world has really sped up the last sort of 5 to 10 years. With the rise of China and terrorism and the wars that have been fought, and there's just so much going on. So for me, wanting to set something in a real world issue, with real world issues going on behind the scenes, it just feels natural for me. So my day job is like research as well. So that probably also helps to answer that question. So for me, I research thoroughly. I mean, I read a lot of manifestos of these white supremacists, and dating back to the 80s as well, that have been behind some pretty gross acts of violence. A lot of books about this stuff. I think when it comes to what happened with the AFP raids on John Bailey in the book, a lot of that is, and I've spoken openly about that, is based on what happened at the ABC. So I was sitting at the ABC at my desk in ABC News Channel, and one of my team came over and said the AFP's in the building raiding us. And for us, that was a pretty extreme moment, to be frank, because the AFP came into the ABC that day. They were searching for the source of a story that 2 great ABC journos had done about alleged human rights abuses by Australian soldiers in Afghanistan. And of course, we weren't about to hand over the source for those stories, but they spent about the most part of a day, so let's say around 8 hours or so, just going through the ABC's files. They had this warrant that they used to raid the ABC that had this extraordinary power in it. And that has been the inspiration for what happened to Bailey, because this power gave them the ability to add, copy, delete, or alter the ABC's files in the course of the search. So I've lifted that power directly from that warrant. I've quoted that directly from the warrant that was used to raid the ABC, to use in the raid on John Bailey's home. And I did that because I'm not suggesting for a second that there are bad eggs in the AFP in Australia now that would misuse that power. But a power like that can be abused. And it got me thinking in terms of the plot for a thriller, how might that happen? And how might, that power getting in the hands of the wrong person, how might that play out? So that became a much bigger plot line in the book than I think I thought it would be in the end. But yeah, that was very much real life. And that's something that in terms of research that I, along with a lot of my colleagues at the ABC, lived through.
So what are you hoping that readers then are taking out of your books? Is it purely entertainment, or you're hoping some of these bigger issues are kind of soaking in to some extent?
Look, I like shining lights into dark places too. And I think you can explore those dark places in crime fiction better than you can in non-fiction, as I said earlier. So I want, when I pick off a big issue in a book, so as I said earlier about the first book and the second book being Islamic terrorism and this one being the issues we're talking about now, I want there to be a level of authenticity behind the fictitious plot where people are going to get a thorough understanding of the issues that I'm talking about. So, for instance, with radicalization, extremism, the role that social media has played in that is just incredible. I mean, if you think about what social media, we're talking YouTube as well and Facebook, and they have been the Wild West of information for a very long time. They're starting to take that more seriously now, and you've seen over the last couple of years announcing things about trying to, curb misinformation. Sky News Australia was kicked off YouTube for a whole week because they were publishing clips full of misinformation about the pandemic, and that sort of stuff is really good to see. It shows them taking some action, but it's not always the case. And the speed in which those media organisations were able to grow without being properly regulated has actually fast-tracked what I think, is not just misinformation, but, to use that awful term, alternative facts, that was bandied around the Trump presidency, where people go to these platforms looking for people to agree with them, agree with how they feel about a topic, agree with what they think they know about a topic. You don't have to go far to find someone who's telling the same lie as you when you're diving into a platform that's got 1 billion users. So that's another thing that I've tried to explore a bit with the book, because if you think about, neo-Nazis, for instance, in Australia, there may not be a huge number of them in the tens of thousands or anything, right? I can't put a number on it. But what social media does in these media platforms is it unites people in Australia and across the world. It could be some disillusioned person sitting in a dark room, in Texas, in El Paso, who connects with someone in Melbourne, and suddenly they don't feel so alone. They feel they've got someone to agree with the way they feel, and that feels them bigger, feels them, emboldened to their cause, and then they start recruiting others through that cause. So through the same medium. So it allows these people to find more like-minded people and to grow their organized, or not organizations, but their groups, if you like.
So how fragile do you think Australian democracy is?
Unfortunately, I think, well, look, I'm a glass half full person, always have been. I think it's always the minority that is, I guess, being elevated through, maybe it's some of the protests that we've seen, or that, through news coverage that brings them like closer to us in our homes, and we think that maybe there's more of these people than there really are. As I said, I'm a glass half full guy. I don't think that Australian democracy is under threat, but I do think that it is threatened by I guess, big media companies that don't have to play by the same rules as responsible mastheads, newspapers, television channels that sign up to a charter that have editorial policies that govern the way they, distribute information. So I think, the short answer to that question is that I'm worried about misinformation. But look, we can look around and see, I guess there's a lot of, we've been talking about, vaccination and, anti-vaxxers out there. Australia is fast becoming the most vaccinated country in the world in this pandemic. So if you want an example about how facts are mattering more and how, responsible media coverage is probably getting more traction than, fake news through these platforms that I've sort of criticised here, I think that that we're okay.
Okay, let's pull back from the big issues to you as the writer. How the hell do you do it? You've got this job, it's enormously demanding. You've got a young family, and as all writers know, that can also be incredibly time consuming. How do you actually get to write these books? I'm sure lots of people are interested to know and are taking notes. How does Tim Ayliffe actually do it?
Look, for starters, I love doing it, and I have a forgiving, wife and family. But look, in the beginning, it was pretty tough. I've been writing books since I was in my early 20s. So, like a lot of writers out there, I've got unpublished books in a drawer. I've got a book and a half sitting in a drawer that, actually almost 2.5, sitting in a drawer that really taught me how to write, I guess, and learn about the writer that I could be. I spent quite a few years, maybe 3.5 years, writing The Greater Good, the first book in the Bailey series, and that was really tough. And I would write late at night. I'd get up early in the morning, and that was a bit of an imposition on our life. And I probably had my time back, I would have done a little bit differently, to be fair. But off the back of that book, I was lucky enough to sign a 3-book deal. So then I knew I really had to sit back and think, okay, how is a more sustainable way to do this? And at the time of actually when it rains, it pours, I got that 3-book deal and started a new job as managing editor of TV news for the ABC, which is overseeing the news channel, a lot of other programs. And I had to really sort of think about how I could do that sustainably. And so for me, it was weekends. So I get up 5:30 on weekends, and I'll write for anywhere between 3 and 5 hours. And during the week, I really just focus on work and family. And on the weekends, it's obviously family time. By the time I finish my writing, it's 8, 9 in the morning. And, we're off to the beach or take the kids to sport. I mean, I coach my son's rugby team, which I love. I take my daughter to netball every Saturday, which I absolutely love, and my favourite moments. But look, I don't sleep a lot. So I find time. And I do think that if you really, really love something, and for me, this is a really nice escape from, I guess, the seriousness of my day job, that it's a really nice outlet for me. And I really love letting that creative corner of my brain, run free.
And so in writing the books, is it getting easier, or are you getting better at it? What do you think?
Look, I don't know that it really ever gets easier. I think what I've discovered is I've learned a lot about myself as a writer. So in that sense, it's gotten easier in that I'm putting more structure around what I do and not being afraid to hit pause. And I know I've heard you talk about this before. If something's not coming for you, you might go for a walk, and that's not wasted time, that's thinking time, and you can solve a problem and then sit down to write again. So for me, look, I do have a couple of strict writing windows, so I've got to get stuff done during those writing windows. But for me, I might use that as thinking time and take some bullet points and things, and try to plot out a bit more if I feel like the chapter I should be writing is not there to write. So I'm learning a heap about myself. When I say it's not getting easier, I don't think it is, because I do find it. I find plotting quite hard. I find writing easy, and I think it should be hard. because if I want to come up with the kind of plots that readers are going to, you know, see, there's twists and turns that readers aren't going to see coming, then that takes time and brain power. And so that's the tough part. I find plotting really hard. But, you know, the writing, because I feel my characters and know my characters, that stuff I really enjoy.
So you mentioned there, you know, you want to have really good twists and turns. How do you develop them? You're writing a book, you know, you want to write about the potential threat of white extremists, but you don't want the narrative to be straightforward and you don't want it to be predictable. So how do you go about ensuring that it's not?
I think of some big moments that I want to happen in the book, and then I work out ways to get me there, but having to go through some doors, if you like, and navigate some things to get there. So, look, it really takes time, and you don't know when these ideas are going to come. Like, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll have an idea and I'll just quickly tap it into my phone or write on a bit of paper. Writing home.
What is it? What does your wife say? She goes, "Oh, Tim, not again."
Yeah, well, it's just, what are you doing? Turn the light off. So as I said, I have a forgiving wife. She needs a medal, actually. But look, it's any time. I could be on the bus on the way home from. Look, today I'm not getting public transport much at the moment, but because I cycle to work. But I had to get the bus today because my bike's in the shop. I had a little fender bender on it, and I'm sitting on the bus, and this idea came, and I just had to quickly punch in my phone. I've been out cycling, and I'll pull over on the side of the road and quickly punch something into my phone as well. It's just, I've got the notes section in my phone gets a real workout, because I don't want to, it's happened to me before where you think, oh, that's amazing. Great. I'm glad I sorted that. You roll over and go back to sleep, and you wake up in the morning and go, what was that, that thing I solved in my sleep?
Now, I think you've given some pretty good tips here, but there's a question here from Lee Shaw asking, as an author, do you have any tips for writers?
Write and read. And there's two big things. Read a lot of the books you want to write, as in, if you want to be a thriller writer, I think read a lot of thrillers and just sort of see the way that other people do it and the way they plot and the way they develop character. But then write a lot as well, and don't try to emulate other writers. Like, find out, discover the writer that you can be. And I'll use an example of this. I wrote something that was a bit more literary in my early 20s, which it wasn't good enough to get published, but it was a real lesson in writing. And I had a good friend of the family who was a reader for me, and he said that you write these sort of action scenes really well, the thriller bits. Maybe that's your kind of thing, you know, maybe that's the sort of style of writer. And it just stayed with me. And so when I sat back down to write another book and have another go, that I thought, well, that's the writer that I can be. And I'm going to play on those strengths, and that's, you know, the discovering yourself. So I think discovering yourself as a writer, but read a lot too, I think, and challenge yourself. And actually, and the last thing I'd just say is that keep writing. You know, if it's your dream to do it, just do it. You know, you will not find a writer who will, you know, you struggle to find a writer that made it with the first thing they ever wrote. Michael Connolly's got books in a drawer, and now he's sold 75 million books. It takes people sometimes a while to learn and get going. So, you know, don't be afraid to have some failures, but learn from them. And I think write because you love it, and write often.
You mentioned that you're an avid reader in your genre of thrillers. Who are the thriller writers that you most like and most impress you?
Look, I think I'm going to say the obvious one. I'm really enjoying your books, so I've got to call that out, because I think you've been, because I know I don't want to embarrass you by saying that. And we talked about, you know, Treasure and Dirt last week, but I think there's a lot of great Australian crime thriller writers that are doing well at the moment, and I think that's the testament to the fact that we've got some great writers in Australia. It's great to see them getting recognised. So for me, I read a lot of Philip Roth. Now, he's not a thriller writer, but he's written more literary crime novels. Really, really enjoyed his stuff because he gives you a sense of the world. In fact, there's this quote, I'm going to misquote him, but he said that he was quoting, I think he was talking about Updike or someone. He said that he shines a light as the world as it is now. And Philip Roth said, with my books, I dig a hole and shine a light into the hole. And I found that really stayed with me. It was a great quote, so I thought I'd just throw that out there. But look, I really enjoyed his books. But in terms of the thriller writers, I really enjoy reading Michael Robotham, another Australian doing really well. I thought Candice Fox's new book, The Chase, is a cracker. Don Winslow's books, particularly the Cartel series, but really enjoyed The Force, was a very, very good book. He's got a very unique style, Winslow, and it's great to see him. It's really paying off with readers. So really enjoy his books. In terms of other thriller writers, or in terms of a crime novel, I really enjoyed November Road by Lou Burney. And it was just an absolute cracker of a book. Reimagines the JFK assassination, but the aftermath only of it, with sort of organised crime. It's just a terrific book, terrific characters. When I talked earlier around character and how great characters drive a novel, November Road, top of the list there in terms of the way character can do that. So yeah, there's a bunch.
But it's a follow-up. It's a kind of a fun question from Warwick Shanks. It says, you read a lot. If you could write a novel but use another author's main character, who would you pick and why? Great question.
Wow. That is a really good question. Who would I pick? That is a really tough one. Oh, I should have mentioned him as well, Connolly. I love Harry Bosch as a character. Maybe that's an obvious one, but I've really enjoyed Bosch's journey over the many, many books. So maybe that one. Although the journo in The Poet, maybe that's someone I'd have a bit more in common with. He's just
McAvoy.
Yeah, McAvoy.
Jack
Yeah.
McAvoy, is it? Yeah.
Jack McAvoy. Yep. Really, really. The Poet's an outstanding book, and it was great to see Jack McAvoy come back in one of the books that Connolly released recently. So yeah, maybe McAvoy actually. Although Bosch had challenged me a bit more, so maybe I should say Bosch.
The interesting thing about that book, The Poet, alluding to what you said before, and I think it was Michael Connolly's 4th or 5th book, but it was kind of his breakout book, and it was the one that let him give up his day job, which is pretty amazing given that, he's now sold whatever it is, 70, 80 million books, right? That he had the unpublished books in the drawer, as you said, but then he had 3 or 4 published ones, but still hadn't quite made it yet. There's a story here that I was going to ask. Margaret Norrington has picked up on the same thing. You said you were lucky enough to get a 3-book deal with Simon and Schuster. Well, you're 3 books in. So what's next?
Look, I'm writing another Bailey book now. And so there's conversations happening. I've got an idea for the 5th one as well. So look, I'm going to keep going with Bailey for quite a while, I think. I feel like I'm just really getting going with him as a character and enjoying writing him in a kind of now mature story world, if you like. So yeah, I'll keep going with Bailey. Hey, another book I should have given a shout out to because it was great. It won the debut for the Ned Kelly Awards, Lorraine Peck's The Second Son. Just think about another book that really captured place, and it's written in Sydney, so Western Sydney. I really enjoyed that book. Some great characters in that one too. So yeah, that's one I've read recently, so I thought I should mention that. So
your first 2 books kind of have a more international setting where The Enemy Within is, Sydney based. Are you thinking more as Australian-based stories now, or is that just a kind of a chance thing, and Bailey could soon be off in some other sort of world trouble spot?
Look, I think the Sydney is a character that I want to keep going with the books. The thing with Bailey is his backstory and his sort of worldliness leads me to other places as well in the book. So in State of Fear, half the book was in London, even though a lot of the stuff was in Sydney. But And a lot of his backstory is set in the Middle East. So I get to go to those places and write about that in those stories. I think that he will travel, a bit more. But at the moment, I actually love setting a crime series in Sydney and making it, my thing a bit too. So yeah, I'm going to keep going with Sydney for a while.
There's a question here from Miro Stokovic. It says, Sweden, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Yeah. Sweden crime literature is often characterized by social criticism. Would you say that transmits to your books? And do you have a favorite Swedish author, crime author?
I haven't read a lot of Swedish crime, which is probably unforgivable considering there's so much good stuff. But I will get into it. So thank you for that question. But the second part of that question was around
the social criticism.
Commentary. Yeah, social commentary. Look, I think in my books, I'm not going to deny that it's not there. It's definitely there. I mean, I look at issues of poverty, inequality, racism. I'm trying to lay it out, I guess, as part of the story, so that I hope readers take from that in a non sort of preachy way. But if I'm going to be truth about the world that we're living in and sort of say that everything that in the John Bailey books either has happened, could happen, or will happen, then that the setting and the social setting as well is really important for me. So, I've told through various characters, like in The Enemy Within, the two sisters that are living on the street, are kind of key characters for me in the book. And so, yeah, getting that stuff right is pretty important for me, and telling that truth. I think the gulf between, rich and poor is only growing, as we know. You don't need to read too many newspapers to know that as fact. So I think being able to touch on some of those issues so that people can connect with the stories as well. I think they can connect with the world that you're writing, the plot that you've given them, if you're accurate about the time and setting and what's going on. I think that's important. So yeah, I think yes to the social stuff.
You say you write your books pretty much set now as the times that you're writing it, and you're setting in Sydney, and of course you want authenticity. So how do you deal with something like COVID, right? It's had this huge effect on all of our lives. One, how's it affected your life and how you go about writing? And two, how do you put that in the book? Do you leave it out? How do you deal with it?
With this book, COVID had just sort of arrived. So I've just got one mention of it, really. I've been grappling with that with the book I'm writing at the moment. It's in there because I think that with everything that I've just sort of said about how I'm trying to, write a lot of truth about the world, it would be pretty hard to ignore. But I'm careful not to write. I don't want to write a COVID book, if you know what I mean. I think it's there in the background, like has been with some other writers with their books as well. Yeah, I deal with it. I don't hide from it, and it's part of the story, but it's not there. I don't want to turn readers away. I think we're all sick of it, So I've tried to do it in a subtle way, but it's there. I didn't want to hide from it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I really went to a lot of effort in the editing of Trust to put COVID references in.
Yeah.
But with Treasure and Dirt, if there's a mention, I pretty much ignored it. It wasn't so much a deliberate objective decision. It's kind of what happened. And I think you're right, different writers do it in different ways. One of the issues, though, is it going to date your book? If it's set in the middle of a pandemic and someone picks the book up in 3 years' time, or it's published in translation or something like that, how's that going to affect the readers? But I might turn that question to you, not about COVID, but about the big issues that you're covering, such as Islamic terrorism, or the events in Afghanistan this year, or white extremists, whatever. how conscious of you are that this is a moment in history that might disappear and date your book, or this is an ongoing problem that's going to be around, for the foreseeable future?
I don't think it's actually a problem. I mean, no one sort of says that about Le Carre's books. People are going back and reading those. I think, look, thinking about film, I mean, Romper Stomper was made 35 years ago. American History X was made 25 years ago. I think capturing moments in time actually possibly makes your book even more interesting for readers. Mobile phones have dated, every book written before 2000. So I think that I don't think it's a problem, actually. I think that by trying to grab a moment in time and a challenge that maybe the world's facing then is possibly makes it more interesting.
Okay, that's good. Now, there's a question here from Liz Shaw. Are you looking at your books as a movie? So from that, I'm going to ask two separate questions. One, is there any interest in making a TV adaptation or something? But also, as a writer, do you think you're a visual writer? Do you imagine, because there's quite a lot of action in your books, there's action scenes. Are you imagining them, almost visualizing them as if they were a movie, or is it some other type of method that you're using?
I am a very visual writer. I do think quite, I guess, cinematically in the way. I mean, it's probably why I became a television journalist as well, rather than a print journalist. So I do think about what it would, I guess, look like. And I love dialogue too. So naturally, I think my books are those types of books. To answer a question around TV and film interest, there's been quite a lot over time, and I'll get in trouble here, but yeah, hopefully it's looking very promising at the moment.
Oh, is it? Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so
fantastic.
But as I said, I'll get in trouble for that.
You heard it here first, everyone. As a writer, what's your most embarrassing moment been?
Well, going back to the question earlier around writing women, I remember with my first book, my wife was reading it and she said, "You dress a lot of women in tight-fitting power suits." And I can guarantee you that line was deleted from the book, and all of the women were not wearing tight-fitting power suits. I actually, and then my sister-in-law was a fashion editor at a magazine, so I rang her up and she helped me dress a brothel madam, which was a awkward question to ask up front. Can you help me dress a brothel madam? But no, she knew fashion, so that was fun. So I think getting to understand writing women, that's something that was a challenge early on, but that was embarrassing. What else? Oh, look, I'll tell you one thing. I've never told this story. When I wrote the first book, I'd had advanced reading copies, and I sent one overseas, and it's not a writer that I've named in this conversation, to a writer that I'd really admire, because he said he'd read it, and he wrote back after I dropped him a note about a month later and said, "Oh, did you get a chance to have a read? Just keen on your thoughts." I mean, it was published already, so I wasn't chasing like cover quotes or anything from him, and I just wanted to know what he thought. And he wrote back and said, "Oh yeah, got here. Didn't get past the first few pages, unfortunately." So I just thought, all right, okay. But you know what? That's it happens to everybody, with writers, whatever you're doing, you gotta have a thick skin for whoever's going to pick it up and what mood they're in when they pick it up. And that was all she wrote. And then I didn't hear again. But all my other reviews have been pretty good, so I've gotten past that one. But that was a moment where I thought, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty. Most writers I find are pretty friendly. Not so some of the readers. Have you ever looked at Goodreads, which is this website where people read and review books, and you get some real shocking sort of comments on that. Have you experienced that?
Yeah, I have. Look, I have a look at Goodreads occasionally, and it's, look, I actually like it because it gets you connect with the readers as well. And look, thankfully, all my books are, averaging 4 stars on there, so it's not a scary place for me to go right now. But ask me after I've released a few more books. But occasionally you see a review on there, 1 star, sorry, couldn't get into it, or just hated it or whatever. But that's the thing, what I was saying before. It's why you got to have a thick skin, because these days you don't get published if you're writing crap, and you got to sort of believe in those that have believed in you, that you're actually okay with this. You're okay at this, so you just got to keep going and wanting to get better with every single book. And you're going to get people that pick up your book at the wrong time. And I've done it. I've picked up a thriller and really wanted to read it, and got through and said, you know what? People keep telling me this book is good. I just cannot get into it. It's a mood and time and place that you're in sometimes as well for the types of books you want to read. So the key thing is not getting too upset about it and cracking on.
Yeah, I have heard someone say that what you really want is a strong reaction. You want people to love it or hate it. You just don't want a mere, it's okay. Okay, now we're almost done. Look, I've got to say, my job's been really easy tonight because there's been so many good questions. Maybe last one before we go back to Catherine. It's from anonymous attendee. It's a good question, but you probably won't win a book pack. In writing some of these characters, like these right-wing extremists, do you ever fear any kind of backlash from them, or do you ever get any sense of danger? We're talking about some of the online commentary you can get about a book. Do you ever fear being sort of trolled or whatever?
Oh, I have been before on social media, but social media is a place where like cowards get to thrive as well. So it doesn't bother me too much. If there's a couple of comments I've had over time where I've thought, but no, nothing too scary, and I don't really worry about it. I think about it a little bit. I went quite deep into Islamic terrorism in the second book, so I did think about it there, but it's not something that keeps me up at night.
Anyway, I'm sure I know that the positive comments outweigh any negative ones, 10, 20 to 1. Tim, thanks so much. Thank you everyone for coming along. I'm going to hand back to Catherine now to
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. That was just a great example of an organic conversation that goes in all sorts of directions, and just fascinating. And I love the little glimpses that you've never told anybody before. The power suits, great things. That was very good. We could ask you, Chris, but maybe another time we could ask you the same question. So look, we've had a tough time here trying to work out our favorite, or which things are the best questions. Now, I don't really you normally like questions about tips, because you think, what are you going to say? But the answer was so good that I think you have to give that I would have to give Liz Shaw a prize for that, because it was one of the most interesting parts of the conversation. In fact, a couple of other people commented on it as well. So Liz, please send us in your address to media@badsydney.com. So that's media@badsydney.com. And I think Warwick Shanks needs to get one as well for the other characters you might like to be. I think that's a great question. But I do also think maybe, Chris, you chickened out of Brenda's question. I'm going to give her a book of my own. I don't know what book. She said,
which question was that?
It was near the beginning. If you could bring one of your characters to life in a forced 14-day isolation COVID scenario, who would you choose? And would they say yes? And why did you choose?
Well, I missed that one. Do you want to answer it, Tim?
Yeah. Look, I want to say Bailey because he's my main guy, but I'm going to say Ronnie Johnson because I love writing Ronnie Johnson. He's such a big character, and he'd have so many stories to tell. And in 14 days, I think you'd be able to get a CIA veteran to share a few.
Who would you have, Chris?
In Tim's book.
No, no, in your book.
Yours.
In one of your books.
Maybe. Ooh, that's an interesting one. Maybe Goffing the Asia guy for similar reasons to Tim's. He's got a few interesting stories to tell, but also the unlikable character, but Harley Snouch is the kind of con man and sort of awful piece of work in Scrublands, but a kind of fascinating character. Not sure about 14 days.
Thank you for that. It's not really up to me to ask questions. I couldn't resist that one. And Brenda, we'll get you something. I don't know what, but we'll get you something. But look, thank you so much. And if you don't yet have your copies of The Enemy Within or any of Tim's books, or indeed any of Chris's books, I've put the Booktopia link in the chat, in the general chat. So just click on it and buy them from there. It helps us too. So we'd appreciate that. Come back in the middle of November we're not sure if it's the 17th or the 18th yet. I'm still waiting to tie up the date for Abir Mukherjee, who's a fantastic British writer born in Scotland, who writes he writes a series called Wyndham and Banerjee, and it's set in Raj era India. Very interesting. So historical and, a lot of very, very good indeed, and very different from a lot of the stuff we read. But this on the 31st, there's a spooky evening with Sisters in Crime, New South Wales Sisters in Crime. So have a look at that. But what I really want to tell you now is that after all this year of change and moving and working out what you're doing, we are hoping to see you all at BAD 2021 at the State Library from the 2nd to the 5th of December. The program will be out at the weekend and you'll be able to jump on and book. You will actually get to see both Chris and Tim again, talking about very different things in very different ways. So it's not like they're not one trick ponies, if that's the right expression. They're many trick ponies, maybe other animals as well. They can do anything. So do come along to those. You'll get an email to tell you if you're one of our subscribers. If not, just jump onto BAD Sydney, subscribe, and then you'll hear about what we're doing. So we hope that we'll be able to have as many people as we want, but there may still be a number limitation. So don't wait too long. We don't quite know what the State Library is doing. But thank you very much, both Chris and Tim. Great to hear about the books and looking forward to the next one on both counts. Thank you very much and see you in December.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. See ya.